This is on, awesome. So, buongiorno, come stai? Was that sounded right? I learned another thing, by the way, which is posso avere una birra? Yeah? It's a little bit early for that, but hey, who knows? I'm not sure what actually is the time to start drinking. Is that lunch? Lunch? Sure. Oh, afternoon. Okay. I heard lunch. So, thanks, first of all, for joining us. Finally, we have these in-person events again. Sadly, as was said, that we don't have Frank and Cormac here, but hey, you have to do it with me, right? What I would like to do in this session, the title is called Cloud Migration Best Practices, but what I really want to do is give you a little bit of look and feel of what it actually looks like in real life, right? We have tons of slides, and I'll show you a couple of slides, but I really want to show you what it looks like for those not familiar. So, a little bit of a theoretical exercise, but bear with me, we have demos, live demos at the end if internet is cooperating. Disclaimer and a quick introduction. I'm Niels Hagoort, so I reside over in the Netherlands, Hollandia, I believe. And in my daily role at VMware, I am tech marketing architect. Basically meaning that I sit in between product management, engineering in the business unit, and customers and partners like yourself. So explaining new capabilities, but also taking in feedback, feeding that back into the BU, into the product. I did write some books, co-authored some books with Frank Denneman and Duncan, and today I focus primarily on VMware Cloud, maybe even more specific VMware Cloud on AWS, and I do have a profound love of everything workload migration, so vMotion basically. Enough about me. What we see happening today, right? We like to talk VMware Cloud, obviously, because multi-cloud, everybody is doing multi-cloud, right? I'm very well aware that we have a large on-prem install base as well, obviously, and that's not going away anytime soon. But what we see happening is that we have a lot of problems with customers who are running vSphere on-prem, vSphere on edge, and a lot of public cloud vendors out there, right? All of these applications, all of these locations, all of these teams that need to work on it, it's disjointed at every level. Networking, security, how do we operate these models? So that's where VMware multi-cloud, VMware Cloud comes into play, right? We create that consistency across all of these layers, making it easy for you. And that's not only about infrastructure, right? We're talking app modernization, how to accelerate that with Tanzu services, for example. Cloud management, how do you actually make sure that costs are within control, right? How do you oversee all of these platforms? Security networking, how do you have workplaces across those infrastructures? A lot of stuff going on in today's IT infrastructure or IT landscape in general. So I would like to talk a little bit about the infrastructure part, obviously, right? And how do we get that consistent look and feel across all of these platforms? And that is where VMware Cloud comes into play. Because this is just, we're talking vSphere, right? VMware Cloud is basically a collection of vSphere, the entire SDDC, what we have with NSX, with vSAN. And we have a model that we now have consistency with vSphere, with VMware Cloud across all of these silos. So we partner with the major hyperscalers. We have VMware Cloud on Google Cloud, on Azure, on Alibaba even nowadays. Oracle is becoming quite big as well. We have IBM, all of these, and they're operated in sort of the same way, which is great. Now, to reiterate, it's not easy to migrate workloads into public cloud if you're just using the public cloud in itself, right? Think about AWS, for example. If you want to move workloads from your on-prem vSphere environment into a public cloud offering, you need to think about how to refactor all of these applications and these workloads, right? You'll probably disrupt your workloads as well because you're refactoring, re-architecturing application, that workload, you need to validate all of these applications and its business requirements against this new model as well, and what to think about operating this model. For those familiar with public cloud vendors, you notice that there's different API sets, different ways of doing security, different UI in itself, right? How do you make sure that you have all of these new skills? And this is actually where VMware Cloud helps. And I'll show you in a bit what it looks like in real life, right? We have that, again, I keep repeating myself, that operational consistency across all of these models. Now, great marketing slide, but what I wanted to point out quickly is how fast this customer moved close to 1,000 workloads, because it wasn't really just the 1,000 workloads, it was 900 something, but marketing, right? They moved that to VMware Cloud on AWS within 6 weeks. And that still baffles me, because moving workloads into a completely different platform, albeit being it VMware Cloud, in 6 weeks is pretty awesome, if you ask me. Now, switching gears a little bit, I'm talking a little bit more to VMware Cloud on AWS in this presentation and in this demo, but large portions of the migration stuff is very much applicable to all the other hyperscalers as well. So bear with me. So for those not familiar with VMware Cloud on AWS, this is something that we introduced in 2017, I believe. And we see customers having their on-prem environment. They can now extend or replace that on-prem environment into VMware Cloud on AWS, or any VMware Cloud offering for that matter. The cool thing about this service is, and how it differentiates from all the other VMware Cloud hyperscaler offerings, is this is really our service, our meaning VMware. So we deliver this service, we operate it, we support it. If you go with VMware Cloud on Google, on Oracle, on Azure, you name it, you'll have them as the primary point of contact, right? So that is a different way of who is supporting and delivering that solution. VMware Cloud on AWS, really our service running on top of AWS infrastructure. And the cool thing is that we are using AWS infrastructure, which is global, right? You can spin up a software-defined data center if you want to in the APJ region, in Hong Kong, for example. You'll have another SDDC that you spin up in Paris or wherever you want. We have a global reach and availability with VMware Cloud on AWS. And because we're using AWS, you can pretty easy connect your VMware Cloud SDDC into AWS native services as well. That opens up tons of capabilities, right? Now, it is important to understand that whenever you subscribe to VMware Cloud on AWS, because this is a service, right? We're talking about a service. So that's definitely shifting from an OPEX or CAPEX model into an OPEX model, operational expenditures. So it is good to understand that we also have Tanzu services included with VMware Cloud on AWS, right? So if you want to start modernizing your applications, you already have Tanzu services in this service directly available for you. And obviously we have HCX, our beloved hybrid cloud extension, to do full large-scale automated, orchestrated automations, and that is actually, we'll take a closer look into that. If I talk about global reach with AWS infrastructure, this is what it looks like today. So we started off on the West Coast in the US, in the origin region, quickly expanded into East Coast, into EMEA, APJ, and we just recently GA'd in Asia Pacific, the Hong Kong region. So we're not stopping there. This is something that keeps on being developed. So we plan our first region, our AWS region, which is enabled for VMware Cloud on AWS in Africa, in Cape Town. So really that global reach, right? Now, whenever we talk whatever cloud, connectivity is on top of mind because we want to utilize that cloud. We want to migrate workloads into that cloud. So what options do we have here? And we have quite some, actually. have AWS, for this specific service, AWS Direct Connect. Again, we have other options with other hyperscalers as well. And I like this option, Direct Connect, because you can see that as a dark fiber, basically, within your office, within your on-prem infrastructure, into the region that you deployed your VMware Cloud on AWS SDDCs in. So high bandwidth, lower latency, and perfect to set you up for successful migrations. We also support VPN, just if you have internet connectivity, we do policy-based, route-based VPNs. You can even configure that as a sort of backup to Direct Connect. And obviously we have HEX as well. And HEX can also provide an overlay network over an existing Direct Connect or internet connectivity. So let's assume that we have everything set up. Again, there's a lot to think about, not connectivity-wise, but security-wise as well. How do I set the firewall rules up in your VMware Cloud on AWS solution? A lot of things that you need to think about before you start migrating, right? But let's assume that we have our SDDC set up, everything checks out, and we're now moving to look, how do we actually migrate workloads into VMware Cloud on AWS? And we have a couple of options. Again, we like to provide options here. So I already mentioned it a couple of times, and by probably the most well-known way of doing this is hybrid cloud extension. So HEX. That is by far the most sophisticated way of doing migrations, because we can do tons of things with scheduling, etc. We'll dive into that a little bit later on. Now, even with HEX, whenever we talk live migrations, vMotion logic is involved, no matter how you look at it. Our beloved vMotion feature, the ability to live migrate an active state of a virtual machine into VMware Cloud, not even from one host to another host, right? Or on-prem data centers, on-prem clusters, but really from on-prem into VMware Cloud on AWS while the application remains active and live. That is pretty awesome, and we'll check that out. Connected to that is the advanced cross-vCenter vMotion capability. Now, for those not familiar, this is a pretty powerful capability baked into the vSphere product nowadays. And we can very well use that to migrate into VMware Cloud as well. Now, maybe less popular options here are site recovery, disaster recovery, but we can sort of misuse those as well to migrate and move those workloads into VMware Cloud. And the thing that I kind of liked is content library as well. Within VMware Cloud, you'll just have a vCenter server instance. So if you have an on-prem vCenter instance with a published content library, we can just subscribe that instance in VMware Cloud on AWS to that on-prem one. And by doing so, ingesting templates that you might have, ISOs, whatever you want, and instantiate workloads in VMware Cloud on AWS. So pretty cool option there as well. Now, if we map those options into certain methodologies, we already discussed hot live migrations, right? Application remains active. We also have warm migrations, which is more a replication way of doing things, and we might have an automatic or manual failover once everything is actually moved over to VMware Cloud in this case. And we have cold migrations. So a powered off virtual machine, we move its data sets and everything to VMware Cloud and we power it on again. Now, HEX can do all of these, right? Where vMotion, we're basically always talking about hot migrations. Cold migrations aren't necessarily referred to as vMotion, but for storage, for example, it's more like a re-register. But we use vMotion logic nowadays, especially with vSphere 8 and the latest bits, to move the data set, or we can use vMotion for that, to move the data set from source to destination as well. So cold migrations. Same thing with advanced cross vCenter vMotion. And we have site recovery, which is definitely warm, and cloud discovery, recovery. Same thing. Content library, definitely cold migrations, right? We have powered off data that we now use to instantiate workloads in VMware Cloud. Now I wanted to take a closer look into HEX and advanced cross vCenter vMotion. So HEX in itself, this is something that is included with VMware Cloud on AWS. So whenever you spin up VMware Cloud on AWS, you can install an add-on, which is HEX. right? And let me see if this is actually working. It's not. Oh, well, sort of. Well, you get the point. Whenever you enable this add-on, you'll have a cloud manager, HEX cloud manager that is deployed, which is just a virtual appliance like vCenter Server instances are today. And it'll let you download a connector as well that you can install on-prem. Now, the first thing that you do is create this side pairing on top of it. So basically, letting HEX understand what the source is and what the destination is. Now, then we can do really nifty stuff with creating that HEX interconnect, an overlay network over whatever connectivity you have set up that we just discussed. And you can move from basically all the supported vSphere versions nowadays, which is still 6.5 and up, into VMware Cloud on AWS. Now, the cool thing about HEX is that there's a lot of orchestration going on. We can filter on a lot of attributes within workloads, and we can create these mobility groups. And that is key, I think, because whenever you have an application, that'll probably span a lot of virtual machines in itself. We talk a lot about the typical 3-tier applications, right? So an application, web front-end, database. You can move those into a mobility group, pick and choose whatever way of migration you want. And for those familiar, RAV, which is replicated assistant vMotion, bulk migrations, just regular vMotion. We can pick and choose whatever we want to. Create these mobility groups and have them being migrated in specific migration waves. Basically, planned windows, and we'll take a look at what that looks like. So a lot of possibilities here, and that makes HEX a really powerful tool. Now, the other one is that we have the advanced cross-vCenter vMotion capability. Now, we have basically two workflows here. We can either import workloads from the destination, in this specific case, VMware Cloud on AWS. But this could be basically whatever vSphere infrastructure. As long as you have ESXi hosts, obviously, and vCenter Server instances, you can use this capability. So we can import and initiate that migration from the destination. We can also push out migrations from the source to the destination. So these two workflows, and mind me saying, these are still live migrations. The cool thing about this is that both vCenter Server instances can be in completely different SSO domains, single sign-on domains. Now think about this. Really, there is nothing in between those vCenter services. You don't even need anything link mode, right? Completely separate vCenter Server instances. Yes, we do have some prerequisites because we need a routable network in between. Right? We need the ESXi hosts and vCenter Server instances to be able to route vMotion network, the vMotion-enabled network, I should say, the vMotion-enabled VM kernels interfaces. We need those to be able to be routed to the destination side. But, and you might need to think about DNS configurations as well. So in this specific case with VMware Cloud on AWS, whenever you use this and your on-prem install base is using fully qualified host names, fully qualified domain names, as for ESXi hosts, for example, you need to make sure that those are resolved from the destination side of things. Now, we can do so pretty easy with VMware Cloud on AWS because we can pinpoint a specific domain name to a specific DNS server as well. So, but once you have those prerequisites in order, it's really easy to do migrations, and we can even do bulk migrations. And almost forgot to point it out, the API for this is already shipped into the vSphere product as of 6.0 update 3. Because this used to be a VMware Fling, for those who know that still. The UI integration, so actually how when it got baked into the vSphere client, that is something that we did as of vSphere 7 update 1C, to be precise. So whenever you're using VMware Cloud on AWS nowadays, the beauty about the services is that we take care of the lifecycle for vCenter Server instances or all the ESXi hosts. So you'll be using the latest and greatest bits, right? So you'll already be running vSphere 7 update 3 nowadays, while we are looking into moving to vSphere 8, which is announced to be initial available as of yesterday. But we already have a early build for VMware Cloud on AWS to use the vSphere 8 bits. So, great stuff. What I wanted to show you is exactly this, what we just talked about, right? Awesome to see slides, but I prefer to see it in real life. Now, this is live. I didn't record anything. I do have internet connectivity, so bear with me. But this is the setup that I have, right? So I have a VMware Cloud on AWS spun up in the US West region, and I have an on-prem lab in Santa Clara, which is just like a short drive from our headquarters in Palo Alto. So obviously we're all the way, well, here, so it might be a little bit laggy, but we should be fine. So bear with me. Let's check if we can actually log in here. Don't mind. Awesome, it's still logged in. So for those not familiar, this is the Cloud Console portal. So whenever you use VMware Cloud or VMware Cloud on AWS specifically, you'll be presented with something similar to this, right? You have a couple of services that are enabled. As you can see, we have HEX, which is enabled, and I wanted to check out VMware Cloud on AWS. As I mentioned, might be a little bit laggy, but here we go. So this is my test setup. This is the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. And you can see that we have this availability zone within this region. And I have 3 hosts, right? So opening vCenter, basically what that looks like, you need connectivity and firewall rules set up for your management IPs, for example. Obviously, I did all that. So whenever you hit up vCenter server, this is what it looks like. Quickly going to the inventory. I zoomed in a little bit. I think that's viewable, right? Okay, so this is VMware Cloud on AWS. The 3 hosts that I have, and you can actually see if you go to summary that I'm using the i3 Metal instance. Today we have 3 instance types that you can pick and choose, depending on your requirements, right, for compute resources. So this is NSX, this is vSAN. We're looking into moving into the next generation of vSAN, the enterprise storage architecture. Probably there will be some talks about that specific new launch feature. And we have a new I4I host instance as well that we recently introduced for this. The cool thing is that we also announced at VMware Explore that we now have NFS data stores, 2 types of them, basically. Our own service, which is Cloud Flex Storage, and we use NetApp ONTAP FSX within AWS. So you can scale storage next to scaling compute resources. That is basically the point here. So a lot of options here. So talking about that operational consistency, this is just a vSphere client that we all know and love, right? So yes, there are some minor tweaks to it because, for instance, update, this would take you to Lifecycle Manager, for example, in an on-prem vSphere install base. There's no views, nothing to see here with VMware Cloud on AWS, and that's again because we do the patching for you. So minor details, but all in all, it practically looks the same. We always have a first cluster with a management resource pool, and that is where all the HEX appliances, NSX, vCenter server are placed, right? So we place our workloads in the compute resource pool here. Okay, so this, not to forget, is my on-prem lab. Couple of hosts, and you actually see that we have some new updates that I didn't install just yet. This is still running 7 update 3. Same thing, I created a resource pool for some management stuff, and I quickly spun up a couple of dummy workloads here. So what can we do now, right? Let's first check out HEX, what it looks like in real life. So remember HEX, right? We have the Cloud Console where we basically can say, okay, we have the HEX add-on that I want to use, and you'll just hit activate. It is already active, as you can see here, and you can do so the same thing for other services as well if that fits your subscription. Now, HEX installs that virtual appliance, right? And whenever you install the connector on the on-prem side of things, it'll do the same thing, and it'll come up with a plugin within the vSphere client. And this is what it looks like, VMware Cloud, or HEX that is connected into VMware Cloud on AWS. So sort of same thing that I was showing before. And you see that we have a side pairing that is set up. That is the first step, as I mentioned in the slide, right? We need to make sure that on-prem is connected to VMware Cloud on AWS in this specific case. So once we have done so, we can create compute profiles. And this is basically saying, okay, these are the networks and the data stores that I have on the on-prem side of things. And these are the networks and data stores that I have on VMware Cloud on AWS, right? So basically making sure that HEX understands where what lives. Once we have set that up, we can create a service mesh. And yes, I just recently updated HEX, but I still need to update my service mesh here. And you can see what services are up and running here. WAN optimization service, that is the beauty about HEX as well. If you're just using a VM or a internet connection, HEX will make sure that the bandwidth is used at the most efficient way possible. Cross-cloud, vMotion, you name it, network extension, and that is actually something that we have set up here as well. So if I go to my network extension, and there's, again, tons of options how to do this, right? We could either just use NSX, which is included, to create a overlay network with on-prem. You might not have NSX on-prem, which is perfectly fine as well. If you have distributed switch on-prem and NSX in cloud, you could still use something similar to this, which is HEX, the overlay. And what I did in this specific case, I created this overlay to make sure that whenever I migrate workloads from this port group, which is just sitting in my distributed switch, that maps into this specific port group on the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things. Now, this name is automatically done so. Even in newer HEX releases, that name changed a little bit. But the fact remains that whenever I move workloads, live migrate workloads, they will remain active and reachable. The connectivity doesn't stop, right? Yes, the latency might change because we move from on-prem into VMware Cloud, but you'll still be able to reach that specific workload, and I'll show you in a bit. There are some other options here as well. Mobility optimized networking is definitely something worth looking into, basically helping you understand how routing for this specific network is. Because whenever we move workloads from that on-prem data store, port group into VMware Cloud on AWS, the gateway for that specific subnet is still residing on-prem, right? So while this is great for workload migrations, at one point you want to think about how to move that gateway into VMware Cloud on AWS. But again, a really powerful tool because it makes migration so much easier. In the end, we have the migration tab. Cool thing is that we can do both ways. With HEX, migrations are always instantiated from the source side, so the on-prem side in this specific case. What you can do, though, is having reverse migrations, basically. So let's hit migrate. This is what that workflow looks like. And yes, we have APIs and everything available as well for those who want to do this in an automated way. And this is what I meant with reverse migration. Basically, well, it is as easy as just swapping the destination and source around, right? So you can easily pull back workloads from VMware Cloud on AWS and move them into on-prem environments as well, if you would like. So it starts with selecting a couple of virtual machines. Now, obviously, we have an app, a database server, and a web front end somewhere. There we go. And this is basically how you can pick and choose certain applications and virtual machines that are supporting that application, right? There's tons of stuff that we can do from understanding how virtual machines and applications actually communicate to each other. And that is something that you want to do upfront before starting migrations. So compute container, we have a resource pool, and this is the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things, right? So let's select this demo resource pool. Storage, we have a vCenter data store within VMware Cloud on AWS, which is used for everything management, vCenter, HCX, etc. We have a vCenter data store, which is the workload data store, and these are things that are configured automatically for you. So we can choose folders if we want, format, and this is where it starts getting interesting as well, because the migration profile we can pick and choose here. So regular vMotion, we can do bulk migrations, so more migrations in one go, and a kind of like replication-assisted vMotion as well. This is something unique to HCX. And what it is, it's basically combining the best of both worlds when you look at replication capabilities that we have and vMotion. So maybe you have this large database backend. Maybe you have file services, right, and a large data set that you want to replicate. And this feature actually does exactly that. It'll replicate the data set, and once it reaches convergence on the destination side of things, then we'll actually kick off the active state migration, which is the vMotion part of it. So pretty cool. Now let's just select vMotion for now, and this is something important as well. We can select a window for migration. So you can do a hard stop at a given time as well, and the migrations will stop. Well, ongoing migrations might be still going, but no more migrations will be done as of that point. So you can schedule whatever you would like. In this specific case, I don't mind so much, just start as soon as possible. We have some options here to remove snapshots, etc., and extended options. Now, retaining MAC is something that is enabled by default, which is great for some applications because they are actually aware of the MAC addresses. It could do all these things because even with a vMotion, what we do on the back end is basically start up a ghost virtual machine, which is not visible, right? We migrate the active state into that virtual machine, power that on, that's an interrupt. Well, I won't go into details on vMotion, but because of that workflow, we can do a lot of things here during that vMotion, so be aware of that. If everything checks out, we can hit validate just to make sure that everything will be good. We have resources on the destination side as well. That's helpful if you want to migrate. And you'll just hit go, and it'll do its thing. Now, we're not waiting around for that because we're on a time here. So while HCX is doing its thing, let's look at the cross vCenter vMotion capability. Now, as I mentioned, we have two workflows, right? We can start while this migration is just going. We have, so let's use this specific virtual machine. That is the IP address 101. I believe that is still, yeah, awesome. Okay, so this is pinging just fine. Let's move this workflow. And again, we can push it out using Migrate, just like you would with regular vMotion, manual vMotion operations. If you were running vSphere 7 Update 1C, you'll see this specific new option, cross vCenter vMotion export. But I kind of would like to show you the other workflow, which is initiated from the destination, right? So whenever you have a cluster, you can hit right mouse button, and you have import VMs here nowadays. So remember, this is the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things, right? There is connectivity set up, so let's just connect to the on-prem vCenter server instance. Yes, sure. Awesome, all set. This is now also in the saved vCenter servers. If you need to do multiple migrations, just remember that whenever you log out of the vSphere client, those saved vCenter servers will be gone. So these are in the user session itself. Again, we're in the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things, and we see all the workloads that are still running in the on-prem side of things. Again, we can just select multiple workloads here as well. So do bulk migration. The only thing that you need to think about is the power state. So you can do either powered on virtual machines or powered off virtual machines, right? In one go at least. Obviously, you can do multiple migrations. App 02 in this specific case, right? Let's hit next. And for those of you who remember the fling, this is better because we now do compatibility checks in between as well. So let's select this one. Compatibility warnings, sure. Same thing, everything checks out, whatever. Okay, this is where things become interesting again. Because remember that overlay that I created with HEX, that layer 2 extension that I created, right? That is this specific port group. So I've set everything up, and here I see some compatibility warnings as well. Now, in this specific case, this is raised because, awesome, Live Labs, right? I was looking for a different one, actually this one. So a knowledge base article, and this is everything to do with the fact that I'm now migrating a workload, a virtual machine, from a distributed switch into NSX-backed switch, right? So it'll throw some warnings that you are doing exactly that, which is perfectly fine. We can move from VDS into, or DVS, whatever you want to call it, distributed switch into NSX and back as well. So let's hit next. We want high priority. Basically, that means that resources are already claimed on the destination side of things. And the vMotion process in itself receives a little bit of a higher priority scheduling-wise. I'm not sure if anybody is ever using the normal vMotion scheduling here, so we might just want to remove that, but hey. Okay. Yes, good to go. Awesome. So you see that on the back end, app 01 is moved with HEX as well. And we see that app 02 is now being moved as well. Cool thing about this is we now started this vMotion from the VMware Cloud on AWS side of things, right? And still there's a couple of miles in between that on-prem lab and VMware Cloud on AWS, its specific region. So, but we see a vMotion, a relocation on both sides, obviously. Same with HEX, but we see that we now have a relocate for this specific virtual machine, which is moved using the advanced cross vCenter vMotion capability. So let's quickly check out our ping, if everything is still working. And this is, again, from the on-prem side of things, right? So if everything checks out, we see that virtual machine being live migrated. And we actually just saw the switch over here. So we missed one ICMP packet here, and now we're traversing that layer 2 extension that we created with HEX. And you'll notice that in the latency, right? Obviously, there's still physics applied, so we have a distance and a couple of routers and networks to traverse. So yes, we see an increased latency, but the application is still reachable and still very much alive. And this is, again, if you really think about this, what is happening on the back end, pretty cool tech if you ask me. Now we can do the same thing the other way around as well, right? We can do so with HEX, as I just showed, but we can do the same thing with VMware Cloud on AWS and on-prem using the advanced cross vCenter vMotion capability. So you might want to move something back. You can do exactly the same things as you did on the on-prem side of things, right? So you just connect into your VMware Cloud on AWS, same wizard, same things, and you'll be good to go. Everything checked out, luckily, and we already see, just curious to see how this is doing. HEX is working on the back end, so the first virtual machine is actually being migrated. And the cool thing about HEX, especially when you have multiple migration windows set up, is you can keep track of all of these migrations. Not necessarily in the recent tasks, which is fine as well. But we can track all of these vMotions, right? This is funny to see because you see the same pairings. So you have this specific pairing, right? And this one as well. But you see the arrow the other way around. And that is exactly what it is. You move from on-prem into VMware Cloud and the other way around as well. So you can keep track of all of these migrations in one go. Awesome. Let's head back to the slides. So this is exactly what we've done, right? We moved all those workloads around, showing you how easy it is, but also to show you that it's just a vSphere client in the end that you're talking to with VMware Cloud. It is just that. Now, a common misconception might be that for VI admins or cloud admins or whatever the personas are, that once you move everything in cloud, regardless if it's public cloud or regardless if it's VMware Cloud, that everything works magically better, faster, secure, etc., which is definitely not the case. Yes, obviously there's all these things involved, but you need to do operations as well. So we always like to talk a little bit about these slides, which are the operational considerations that you might have. Because yes, lifecycle of ESXi host, vCenter server, that's done for you. I don't know a lot of people who actually enjoy doing those things and planning those things. So that's actually a plus for the VMware Cloud service. But think about everything when it comes to monitoring and logging. Security audits, probably even more important than in on-prem, right? Because you're now in somebody else's infrastructure, basically. So you really need to keep track on who has access to these workloads, to the management planes as well. What about backups data protection? That is not something that is being done automatically if you move into public cloud or VMware Cloud, right? You need to set that up for yourself. Workload management, that's something that is largely overlooked as well, in my opinion. Think about all of the resources that are being consumed. In the end, you're paying for a number of hosts with VMware Cloud on AWS. Same thing in on-prem. If you're looking into designing a new infrastructure, what you want to do is to be as efficient as possible with the compute and storage resources that you have, right? That is basically what virtualization brought us, that we can do a lot with a lot more with one specific hardware set, basically. So think about right-sizing, checking VM DRS scores, for example, making sure that performance is adequate. With VMware Cloud on AWS, we have some unique features like elastic DRS, DRS being our beloved distributed resource scheduler, making sure that each and every application get the resources that they are entitled to. With elastic DRS, we can even make it so that we'll automatically add a host into your VMware Cloud on AWS as DDC if workloads are asking for more performance, basically, more performance or more capacity. So think about doing that as well. Network traffic flows. Hey, you might have an office and a VMware Cloud on AWS as DDC. You might have multiple offices. You might have public services running or public applications running on top of your VMware Cloud. Everything is network traffic flows. If you're looking into VMware Cloud, it definitely helps if you understand all the constructs with NSX, for example, because NSX is largely leveraged for everything networking and security related on that front. So make sure you're aware of all these things. Now, I wanted to let you go with a couple of resources where we have a lot of information. So the top one is our TechZone site, vmc.techzone.vmware.com. Lots of demos, white papers, all the sorts, basically for all the hyperscalers, VMware Cloud on AWS, but also Google, Azure, all the VMware Cloud offerings, Oracle, you name it. We have something similar for everything vSphere, which is core.vmware.com. Not on this slide, but it is definitely alive and kicking. So whenever you look into vSAN, vSphere stuff, check out that. We do have a hands-on lab available that you can just do from your own computer, laptop, making sure that you that you can experience VMware Cloud as well, getting your feet wet with VMware Cloud, basically. And with that, I would like to say, enjoy the rest of the VMUG. I'm still around up until lunch somewhat, until I have some other meetings. So if you have any questions, feel free to hit me up, and have a nice day. Thanks.